We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Starts right off with some very familiar words or verses. If you know the song from the 60s by the band The Byrds, they did not inspire this. This was what inspired their song. So, chapter 3, verse 1 says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." In other words, life just goes, right? If you've been alive for very long, you've experienced most, if not all of these, or at least seen them active in the world, and it's kind of a big picture, right? This isn't a real narrow, a real focused in picture, these 8 verses. This is Solomon stepping back and look at it, just life in general. And I think that part of this is there's nothing that stops this. If I'm not here tomorrow, these same kinds of things will still go on the face of the earth. There will be others who will be born if it's my time to die. I probably think about that a little more at my age and seeing grandbabies being born and all that. But we know, and we looked at Psalm 139, we read through it anyways on Sunday morning, and we know that our days are already numbered. In fact, our days were numbered before we were born. And David recognizes, Solomon's father, that God wrote those days out. He knows every moment of all those days. We just get them as they come. Right? We don't get to know everything about what's coming. We hope, we make plans. Sometimes the plans pan out, sometimes they don't. We're told in Acts 1:7, just even about the time that we probably look forward to the most, the day that the Lord comes back, or at least that's, we can remind ourselves often of that. That should be our great hope, our thing that we think about the most. And Jesus said, you don't get to know the day or the time. You can look at seasons, and really what we look at for seasons, even though, is what was said about those days in prophecy. That's how we're able to look at the world and say, hey, it's going in this direction, or this particular thing that Isaiah talked about is shaping up and forming up, or this thing that Ezekiel talked about, or this that Jesus talked about in Matthew. These things are coming to pass, or they're setting up to come to pass, and so we are probably more excited about the return of Jesus than anybody before us, or any generation before us. Maybe not. I mean, they had their reasons to think that he could come back in their day, and honestly, the apostles, they lived like Jesus could come back at any moment. They taught like Jesus could come back at any moment. And as should we. Now, we have everything together. We have the entirety of the Bible in front of us. We have nations that they maybe knew about but didn't know much about. Obviously, they knew something about the areas that Ezekiel would prophesy about, nations coming together to form an alliance to attack Israel. We see it happening, right? We see those nations, those specific nations coming together. We get to see all of that, and yet, so we have a sense of it's close, but we don't get to know the day. We don't get to know the hour. And should that be something that's 100 years away, in between here and then, all of these things in this list, in these 8 verses, are going to continue to take place. Jesus even mentioned, when he talked about his return, that it would be as it was in the days of Noah. And rather than focusing on every thought of man was evil continually, I mean, we know that. And we can look and see that the wickedness of men's hearts seems to be growing. What we are able to do without any remorse seems to be growing. And to the point where people who study are thinking, this is like the days of Noah. But Jesus focused on rather, people were going to be going about their business. Right? They're going to be eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, just like, they don't notice all the other signs around them. They're just going to be going about their business. It's going to continue on. These things will continue on until Jesus comes back. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant. So planting and harvesting is going to go on. A time to kill is not a time to murder. All right, so let's not do that. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. Well, there's all kind of reasons why there's a time to kill. Most of our food comes from us killing something. So it's not murder that he's talking about. He's not condoning murder. But there's a time to kill, and they had actually there in that time, and we do in certain places have capital punishment for capital crimes. So there's a time for that. It's not supposed to be pleasant or wonderful. I mean, but there's a time to do that, and then there's a time to heal, and we know that what might seem the less or the good part of these back and forth statements here are pretty easy to accept, but there's always the hard part that goes down with that too, right? Even a time to break down and a time to build up. I don't like to see old buildings go down myself. I like to see them stand. I'd rather see them restored. But there's a time when it's like, you know what? It just needs to go. The old hospital sitting out here. I'm sure it would be very interesting to kind of walk through that and see. It needs to go. It in my opinion, that's my opinion. It would be better to tear it down, and if you want to build something up there, then build something up there. If there's something else that we could do and benefit the community, rather than just an old building that people break into and vandalize and do whatever they want with it. So eventually there is a time to break things down and to tear them down. And there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. That's pretty evident. That's easy to understand. A time to mourn and a time to dance. And dancing would imply celebrating. Right? There's a time to celebrate. The two moments in life, if you will, that would fit into that is a time when you're marrying, and that certainly is a time to celebrate. But a time when that spouse goes, they go home to be with the Lord, there's a time of mourning there. It's not, mourning in a sense that you stop living. I don't even think it's implied here. I think it's part of our life. We're going to mourn, and we have to keep moving. We have to keep moving forward with that. And so there's a time for it. We don't want to not mourn. It's amazing to me how many funerals that I hear about. I can't say that I've ever been in one, but funerals that I hear about where the pastor will say, you shouldn't be crying, you shouldn't be weeping about this. If this person's gone to be with the Lord, why are you upset? And really just kind of shame people, try to shame them out of mourning for what they've done there. And I get just a fraction of that, in that, yeah, they're with the Lord. Why would I'm not mourning, is like Paul said, we shouldn't mourn as those who have no hope. But it doesn't mean that we don't miss them. Jesus didn't go to Martha and Mary and thrash them about, hey, I'm here. Who cares if he's dead? I'm going to bring him back. Or, he could have left Martha with her answer of, well, I know I'll see my brother in the resurrection. Good, now stop crying. He could have done that. He didn't need to do that. He shouldn't have done that. He didn't want to do that. And even after he addressed the two of them, he goes to the tomb and he sees what's going on around. He knows what he's about to do. And instead, he mourns because death has touched his friend. The result of that has touched many of his friends and the people around him, and he sees what's going on, and he knows that death has come because of sin. There's a lot more to it for him, but he's still, in that moment, he enters into mourning, and he's compassionate with Martha and Mary, and willing to mourn with them and kind of take on where they're at. So this idea that Christians should never mourn is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Listen, there'll be a day when we don't anymore. The Bible tells us he's gonna wipe that last tear from our eye, and that'll be done. The mourning will be done. And there's a time to dance, a time to celebrate. You know what? Some of the deadest weddings I've ever been to are weddings that are for believers. It's like, come on. If the family won't celebrate, the church that they're a part of ought to celebrate with them. This is something that God has chosen. This is a relationship God chose to exemplify his relationship, Jesus' relationship with the church. God celebrates this. God created this union. We should celebrate it. A time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones. Now, the only thing I have in my mind is, again, preparing a field to be planted. You're going to gather up the stones, and you could take it either way. You're going to gather them up and pile them all up in one end, or you're going to just start chucking them as far as you can to get them out of the field. I don't know. But I guess that one of the things that the enemies of that time would do when they came into a land that they conquered, but they weren't going to occupy, is they would take all the rocks and throw them back out in the field to make it so it couldn't be plowed. So if you came in at a time when it was time to plant, and you could wreck their field by filling it full of rocks, they might not get anything, even if you're just passing through, even if you're going to leave them, they might not have a chance to be able to plant and get their food back in the ground. So I don't know if this is really good for a reference for a tactic of warfare, but there were other times, though, to gather stones. Like I thought about when Israel crossed over the Jordan, and Joshua had them take 12 stones, and they put a monument right in the river, and then they get on the other side and they build another one on the other side that were to be remembrances of what had happened and where God had brought them through. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. So again, you think about the compassion aspect and coming alongside somebody and trying to be peaceful, and really sometimes just not saying anything at all, right? If somebody's in mourning over something, gone through a very hard time, you can just about assume they've already heard all of the good words they possibly could get. It might be just enough for you to sit there and be a part of their mourning with them. But a time to refrain from embracing, there's a time for rebuke. To have to not to have to say things you don't want to say. They should be said with love, right? Paul tells us to speak the truth in love, so that compassion has got to be there when you do it. And this is not, so this isn't, pushing somebody away. This is like, whoa, hold on a second. You're in the position you're in because of X, Y, and Z. And you may have to speak some truth to somebody and say, hey, and it may not even be received, right? And, if you have kids, a rebuke is not really well received. They might come up and, hey, Dad, how you doing? And they don't think you know. And they're just going to act like nothing's happened, nothing's wrong. And you're like, yeah, you and I need to talk. Sit down. I've had those moments with my kids. And so there's a time to do that. Got to remember to mark where I'm at. All right, verse 6. It says a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away. All right? So a time to gain, to build up, to store up some things, a time to lose. Maybe even more economically or monetarily, that's speaking about there, where, it's a good time to get into something where you're going to make some money. This over here might not honor God. Better to lose money than to dishonor God. But a time to keep and a time to throw away. I got a lot of stuff needs thrown away in my garage. So, right? There's a time to keep it. You look at it, you go, you know what? Someday I'm going to wish I had this. And then probably what's going to happen, the next question is, but are my kids going to wish I had thrown it away when they're going through all my stuff? So there's a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow. Something, this is kind of a reference to one of the practices that Jewish people had was, and even still today, I guess, there's a time of mourning or some kind of an anguish or even anger at times. I think we saw this with the high priest during Jesus' trial, when he decided Jesus had blasphemed and he tore his clothes. So in a time of blasphemy or a time of deep sorrow, they would tear a part of their clothes to show that they were in mourning or that there had been some great offense. But there's a time to sow, to patch things up, to put it back together. And if the first part, the time to tear, implies one of those instances, especially some kind of anguish or whatever, the time to sow is to fix it. That should just as much be a sign to those around us that I'm moving past it. Things are better than they were 5 minutes ago, or whatever it was. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. And I mentioned that at times when people are in mourning, it's sometimes better to just be quiet. I can, from my own personal experience, our second miscarriage was one of those times where you get to where you don't really hear what people are saying to you. They have all the good intentions of the world. It's not helping. And it was the one or two people who knew and who understood, because they'd been through it before, that just kind of came along and said, hey, this is horrible. And they weren't throwing Bible verses at us that we already knew. They weren't worried that we were losing our salvation or walking away from Jesus. They just knew it was a bad deal. It was a bad time. And they were the ones that helped the most. They weren't asking questions that, we've all done that. Maybe we're walked into situations like that, and just the first thing out of our mouth is, how are you doing? Well, I already know how you're doing. This is horrible. Your eyes are swollen from crying, and you have a look on your face like you don't want to see anybody. I already know how you're doing. But, that tends to be the first thing out of our mouth, and it seems foolish when it happens. But there's a time to speak and a time to be quiet. You think of Job. His friends should have just stayed quiet the whole time. They were good old boys. They were good buddies when they sat there for a couple of days and didn't say anything. But when they opened their mouth, they should have went back to being silent. A time to love and a time to hate. There are things that we're not supposed to embrace. We're not supposed to like. We're not supposed to love. It should look like we hate it. We don't even have to say that we hate it, but if it's something especially that dishonors God, and the world doesn't want to accept that. The world wants you to accept what they've done. If you really accept them, if you really do love them, you'll accept what they've done. They don't like hate the sin but love the sinner. They don't like that. Because then they don't get, how can you look at me and love me as a person, but you don't love who I say or what I say I am, or the decisions that I've made. And you won't acknowledge, and you won't, it's not that we don't acknowledge it, but you won't affirm what I've done and see it as a positive. You only see it as a negative. Well, you don't really love me. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm never going to say abortion is a good thing. I'm never going to say that sexual sin is a good thing. I'm not going to agree on any of that. Doesn't mean I hate you. I love you enough to tell you the truth. God doesn't approve of what you're doing. And to live separate from him is, you don't even have to get into what they personally done. You can just have to say, hey, if you don't know Jesus, you don't love Jesus, you don't follow him, he's not your Savior, you're going to hell. And it's, who are you? Well, it's not me. Read the Bible. It's in the Bible. I can't get away with doing it like that. Pastor Chuck could. He could smile and tell somebody, if you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell, and that person thought that man loved them to death. If I do it, it's going to come out wrong. I could say the exact same words that he said, and they're going to take it the wrong way. But anyways, there's a time to hate and a time to love. A time of war and a time of peace. Those are facts of life. They're not good. War is not good in the sense that it's a fun thing or whatever. But it's necessary sometimes. It's necessary for one nation, if you want to go on a grand scheme of things, for one nation to stand up against another. It's necessary to protect your borders. It may be necessary, if you want to take it down into a more personal level, it may be necessary a person to person. There's a time for war and a time for peace. You walk into my house in the middle of the night and I don't know you, we're going to war. There's not going to be a peace treaty. There's no negotiation at the table, buddy. We're going to war right now. And I intend to win or die trying. That it's just, there's a time for that. It's hard to understand if you've not been in the military. I don't know why it's easier to understand, to be honest with you, if you have been in the military. I haven't had, and people don't get it, I don't think sometimes, but I have not had as hard a time with some of the things we've done in the last 20 years since 9/11. I see the necessity for our forces to be in different places around the world. It keeps the enemy off of our shore. I understand taking the fight to the enemy rather than waiting for him to come and get you. So I understand there's a time for it. I don't want to be a warmonger. I don't want to be doing it all the time. I don't, you know. And certainly peace is better. Peace is better. And there's a time for that. David was a man who was, Solomon's father. He was a man of war. His whole reign just about was being at war with the Philistines, or even with his own son, with Absalom at one point. And in Solomon's reign was almost completely peaceful. He didn't have enemies always trying to invade, and he didn't have armies. We don't have a lot of stories of great wars that he fought. And he had a show of force, but the man made shields out of gold and silver. You don't make real shields to go to war out of gold and silver. That's a soft metal. It doesn't protect much if you got a chunk of iron flying at you. So he had a time of peace, and his father didn't. So there was a time to establish that nation. There was a lot of wars that went on during the reign of Saul and David. And all Solomon is saying here is that these things are run in cycles. And sometimes it seems like the whole world's at war. Sometimes it seems like most of it's at peace. All of these things, they're back and forth. People die, people are born. This is day-to-day life all over the world. Verse 9 says, "What profit has the worker from that which he labors? I've seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God." So on the one hand, he's like, what's the benefit? What's the benefit? And this is completely different from Proverbs, isn't it? He was always warning of the lazy man and how he's going to have nothing, and what a blight on society he is, and the one who works hard and prepares and stores and does what he's supposed to do, and he's a great benefit, not just to himself, but to his community around him, to those who are around him. But Solomon again is examining everything without God. Right? We're just under the sun, S-U-N, under the sun in the sky. These are the things that just go on day to day. This is really how the world sees life. There's no purpose except day to day under the sun, right? They have no expectation of God. They don't want to acknowledge God. They don't have any expectation of going to see him as judge or savior, either one. And, so Solomon is giving us, from their point of view, what life is. And so he's like, what is the profit of it? Except that he says here, these are God-given tasks. So we should be, according to God, we should be working, we should be active, we should be living, we should be doing business, we should, going through the things that we just talked about, that long list. He says, I've seen the God-given task by which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. So God has made everything beautiful in its time. He's made seasons. There's times when everything is beautiful. We lived in the Mojave Desert for 2 years. There actually are times when that very desolate looking place is beautiful. On the occasion that they have a rainy season, there's flowers everywhere. Now they die off pretty fast. Because when the rainy season is done, they're gone. You know, the year that we moved out there was a lot of rain. In fact, on the way out, and Steph already smiling, she probably already knows what I'm going to say. On the way out, Tracy's trying to be encouraging. I've already been to this base, to Edwards Air Force Base. I've already been there multiple times. It is not a place that says, hey, come and stay with me. This is where you want to live. And I was in the time to mourn part, moving out there. That's where I was at. And she was trying to be that say the nice thing, say the good thing, you know. So even when we went through Arizona and we went through New Mexico, and she's like, this is beautiful. The desert's gorgeous, you know, seeing all the different colors and the rocks and everything. I'm like, yeah, this isn't where we live. There's mountains there, you know, you can see all kinds of stuff. We literally came over that last bit of mountains and into that valley, and we weren't driving down that road for more than a half an hour. And you could see some ramshackled houses and gas stations. You couldn't tell if they were open or not. And she said, wow, man, nobody lives here. And I just looked there and said, yeah, welcome home. She's like, what? I said, yeah, and it's 3 more hours before we get there. She's like, huh. So she then figured out why I was the way I was. But then we had a rainy season right when we got there. And we got there in February, and we were, you know, a couple of days, and then the rain started, and it rained almost the whole month. I'm like, this is crazy. I've never seen rain in this part of California, in the desert. And when it says it never rains in California, it never rains in California, in Southern California. And but it rained and rained, and all these little ponds filled up out in the desert, all these little dry lake beds filled up, all the big dry lake beds filled up. There were ducks everywhere, all kinds of birds, bushes were blooming, all the little plants on the floor of the desert had flowers on them. It was beautiful for about 2 weeks. The rain stopped, it all went away. And when that stuff dries up, it smells bad. All the ponds are full of brine shrimp. Well, all the dried up ponds are full of death. It was bad. It was bad. But I don't know how did I get on that from where we were at? Anyways, I've seen the guy given task. I don't think does it either. Anyways, I don't know how I got there. He has made everything beautiful in its time. So it is time. Now, the second year we were there was no rainy season. It never bloomed. The ducks never came back while we were there. The birds weren't there. You know, we didn't have the brine shrimp all over the place either, so that was good. But yeah, in its time. And he also put eternity into their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. So God's put eternity in our hearts. It's in our hearts to want that. Everybody. Was it in John chapter 1? Let me see if I can find it real quick. I wasn't intending on going here, but... Oh, wrong way. Oh, this right way. Anyways, not seeing it right away. I should have marked it. Verse 9, yeah. Thank you. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. He's talking about Jesus, calling him the light. making the differentiation between him and John the Baptist, John not being that light, but that Jesus was the light that comes into the world and brings light to every man coming into the world. In other words, he's put into us, I believe, and I think Solomon backs it up here, God's put into everybody who comes into this world to seek him. There's a little bit in us that should cause us to look for our Creator. But when they look around and they say, well, we can't, you can't explain it. It's always been this way. And Peter even warns that last days, that'll be a big thing, right? It's been this way from the ancient times. Nothing ever changes. Nothing's new under the sun. And it kind of squashes that thing that God has put in our heart, that desire to want to know our Creator, want to know where we came from, wants to know our purpose, why we're here. But if you won't look for it, if you won't feed that, if you don't try to find it, then you just come to the conclusion that nobody can find it. And there's so many different arguments out there, so many ideas of what are we really here for? How did we get here? The world has come up with all kinds of things to just squash that desire to look for God. Even some of the religions like Buddhism, the ultimate goal in that is to get to where you understand you're not even real. There's nothing. Nothing's real. You just stop existing. Who chases a religion like that? You want to look inward so far to the point where you understand, I don't exist. I don't exist for anything. I mean, you might as well just be an atheist. That's the same thing they believe. I'm not here for any reason. I'm not going to be around for any reason. I'm not leaving anything behind. There's nothing to believe in. The only thing I want to do is tear apart religion. They have a purpose now, it seems. They can attack Christianity. But outside of that, what is their purpose? Verse 12 says, I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It says you should live a good life. You should look for God. Find out the purpose. What do you have? What purpose are you here for? To do good. Right? To live a life, and to live a life that is doing good is to live a life that is selfless, not selfish. And Solomon says, I know this is what's better for them. I know it's better for them to rejoice. You're not going to really rejoice unless you know the Lord, unless you are seeking after God. You're not really going to do good unless you believe there's somebody to answer to. There's somebody who motivates you. There's something that comes after this, right? You put eternity into man's hearts. If you don't think that there's an eternity coming, then what's the point? If there's nothing after this, what's the point? Paul goes so far as to say if there's no resurrection, then we of all people are the most pitiful. So I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. Right? So be satisfied with what you're doing. Right? Live, eat, drink. You don't want to be the miser that makes a bunch of money and shoves it on a mattress and then just dies. You want to live life. I think Chuck Swindoll was really good at kind of making this point. And I don't remember anything that he's saying right now coming to my mind. I just remember him saying that a Christian should not be walking around all long-faced all the time, doing nothing. Enjoy life by the means that God's given you, right? So to whatever degree he's blessed you financially, live life, you know? Yeah, if you want to go jump out of an airplane and get a thrill, man, go ahead. I'm not going to do it, but that doesn't make me happy. The thought of it doesn't make me happy. But you know, I don't mind going out and sitting in a boat and getting a line wet, or sitting in a deer stand, you know, or you know, anything like that. You like to go camping, go camping. You like to go stay in a hotel, go stay in a hotel. You know, have some vacation time, have some getaway time. That kind of stuff shouldn't necessarily consume our lives. But God did not make us so that we don't ever enjoy anything. That we can't take in what he's made, his creation, or we can't take in and what he's given us. You know, whatever kind of person he's made you to be, live life with that. That's a great witness to people. You know, that in spite of the world and in spite of all this other list of things, some of them good, some of them bad, we don't just live by that. We're not just sitting around watching the clock tick until we die. We should have fun. We should be able to smile and laugh. People come to church and come to, you know, Christmas Eve service, or come to on a Sunday when we're having potluck. They should see happy people. Right? Because we have this great hope that we're looking for. And this is one thing that makes and is in common for all of us. And it brings joy to our hearts. No matter what's going on, we can have joy, and we can rejoice in some things. I don't want you to be, you know, ignoring reality and acting like everything's fun and games and wonderful and good when it's not. But a long face should not be a way of life for us. All these things are a gift from God. You see everything as a gift from God. Need to speed this up a little bit. All right, 14. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear him. I have so much I could say about that because of all the hyper-Pentecostal. I came out of that stuff, so that's why I have a lot to say about it. But the idea that you can speak things into existence, and your words this and your words that, you do not. Solomon says right here, you don't have that ability. Whatever you think you have, you don't have it. That's God's and God's alone. He makes it, it'll be forever. You can't add to it, and you can't take away from it. His plan is what it is, and it's going to be done in his time. It says that which has already been and what is to be has already been. And God requires an account of what is past. All right, so that which has already been and that which is to be has already been. And God requires account of what is past. In other words, God sees it all beginning to end. Right? He's not confined by time. He's outside of time. For him, it's already done. It's a done deal. Right? The things that we're studying in Revelation, when we get past the church age and we start to see the things that are going to take place in that 7-year tribulation time, what we'll see that'll take place as far as the millennial kingdom, and then the great white throne judgment, then the new heavens and the new earth, all of that, as far as God is concerned, that's done. It's not going to change. We're not going to add to it. We're not going to take away from it. It will happen just as he said it has happened. Verse 16, moreover, I saw under the sun, so he's reminding us now, back up away from God, just in the day-to-day, moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. So the things that should be steady, righteousness and judgment, put them together, righteous judgment. And in those places he saw wickedness and he saw iniquity, he saw sin. So in what we think is good, what we think is solid, it isn't. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. And there is a time, for there is a, I can't read it right now. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in my heart concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Surely all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the animals, or over animals, for all is vanity. All right, so now he's gotten back into this. We're no better than the animals. And listen, the argument he's presenting here is what the world has. We're no better than the animals. In fact, if you want to listen to him now, we're below the animals. Who do we think we are to be destroying this planet and making life so unbearable for all the animals? All go to one place, verse 20. All go to one place, all are from dust, and all return to dust. Well, that's right out of Genesis, isn't it? We all were formed out of the ground. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men which goes upward, and the spirit of the animals which goes down to the earth? Solomon said it, not me. The animals aren't going up. But he's saying here, there's no difference, right? Who knows? Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, except for that we know? You know, 2 Corinthians 5:8, Paul says that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. We know what happens with us. John 11:25, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. So there is a difference, but you got to look at that from outside of, you got to get past where Solomon's looking. He's keeping us on the face of the earth. He's keeping us under. He mentions God a couple of times here, but his focus, his big experiment is nothing matters, really, what he's saying, nothing matters without God. This is day in and day out. Men live, men die. Animals live, animals die. What's the difference? If you're not going to look at life and spend your life pursuing God, in relationship with God, there's nothing. Solomon says it's all vanity. It's like trying to grab a hold of a cloud, like trying to grab a hold of vapor. There's no substance to it for you. You have to, and when we get to the end of the book, you'll see that it's man's all to seek God. Verse 22 says, so I perceive that nothing is better than that. A man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? You don't know what's going to happen after you, except for that everything that you accumulate, somebody else is going to have, because you're not taking it with you. So you might as well enjoy it now. My mom said when my grandparents finally decided to move from their house, where they had all kinds of stuff accumulated, finally moved from their house and moved into a condo. And they sold their house. They were able to pay for the condo. Their house had been paid off for a long time. If I remember right, she said, my grandpa said to her, spending your inheritance. Which, my mom was okay with that, but she was just like, I thought it was funny myself. that they didn't just stay in that house where they could barely get around anymore because there were steps and they were older and, they can only live and take care of half of the house. Why bother to stay there when your kids and grandkids only come home maybe once a year and not all at the same time? And, the rest of the house wasn't being used anymore. You sold it to a younger family, and there were parts that my grandpa didn't get finished off, that all the materials were there to finish it, but he just didn't get a chance before his heart gave out on him and all that to be able to get it done. And but anyways, he kind of took that on. Just rejoice in your work. Go. But that's not man's all. And that wasn't my grandfather's all either. That wasn't his life. I think that's what made it so he could sell that and move into a smaller place where they could get around and still live life. It wasn't everything to him anymore. And he was always involved in church. He was always involved in the leadership of church, and he had other purposes in life. It wasn't the house, and it wasn't all the stuff that they accumulated and all the memories they were hanging on to. I mean, they probably still hung on to more things than they should have, but it was a fraction of what they had at that house. There was a lot of stuff where it was, time to throw it out. They threw it out. And but anyways, again, without God, this is just day in and day out, without a lot of meaning. You have to have God in that so that you understand there's more past this life. We're living this life like we're running for the finish line because we know what's coming after that. And that's how we should be. And not just caught up in the humdrum of life. And like I said, I don't think a Christian's life should just be humdrum. There are some exciting things for us to do. We should go do them. And sometimes ministry gets exciting. Sometimes ministry even gets a little dangerous. You want to have some dangerous stuff, do some ministry. You need an adrenaline rush? There's probably some kind of missionary organization you could get hooked up with. Anyways, let's pray. Lord, thank you for this word. And I've read and heard so many that just want to talk about how depressed Solomon was. But Lord, this is a good reminder to look beyond just what we can see, beyond just the sun and the stars and the moon, but to understand that life is really only life with you. And the meaning of everything changes, and the purpose of everything changes with that. And so, Lord, I just thank you. This is an encouragement, really, for right before Christmas, and as we get ready to enter into a new year and get into the coldest part of winter and all the things that sometimes bring us down, shorter days, longer nights, and all of that. And politicians who promise misery. But you have put it in the heart of your people to live life and to be light. And so, Lord, thank you for the reminder. And Lord, fill us with your Spirit every day to be able to do what you've called us to do, in spite of what the world wants and wants to present. You've presented us with an eternity, and we can't wait to get there. Keep us safe as we head home tonight, Lord. And we look forward to Christmas Eve, and when we'll be together, and we look forward to Christmas as we'll be together with other people, and help us in those times, Lord, to be light in life, because we won't always be, not all of us will be with people who believe. So give us strength. Remind us of why we're here. We love you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.